I don't know why it didn't want me to record, but now it's recording. Okay, so we are going to start with factoring out the GCF. And there's kind of two parts to the GCF. The first thing that you want to look at is you want to look at your number. Okay, so is there a number that goes into 40 and goes into 35? What number would that be?
5.
Yeah, you got it. Good job. Okay, so I'm going to put a 5 on the outside. Then I'm going to look at my x to the fourth, and I'm going to look at my x to the second. Okay, and in this situation, they're both x's. So I am going to take the lowest exponent and pull that out. So what's the lowest exponent between x to the fourth and x to the second?
X to the second.
Good. It's x to the second. So I'm going to pull x to the second out. Now what I have to do is I have to find out. So I ask myself, 5 times what number gives me 40? 5 times what gives me 40? It is 5 times 8, yes. Yes, that gives me 40, okay? Then I think of x squared times what gives me x to the fourth. So I'm going to have x to what power gives me x to the fourth?
X to the second.
Yeah, you got it. That's exactly right. Good. And now I'm going to do that again. So 5x squared times 8x squared gives me 40x to the fourth. Now I'm going to do it with the 35x squared. So 5 times what gives me 35?
7.
Good. And then I don't need any more x's. And so that's all I do. I have 5x squared is on the outside of the parentheses. And then it's 8x squared plus 7. So that is us factoring out the GCF. And that's one of the different types of things that we're going to factor out. Okay, and so this one is factoring out the GCF. Okay, let's do the next one. Okay, this one is factoring by grouping. And to do this one, we have to have 4 terms. You can only do factoring by grouping when we have 4 terms. I guess it's windy. So the first thing we do here is we look at the first 2 terms. Okay? And so I've got x to the third and I've got 9x squared. So what number or what variable comes out of both of those 2 terms?
So you just like bring out like one number? Or?
Yep, and so x to the third just has a 1 in front of it. Okay, and so there's no number that we can take out of both 1 and 9 other than just the number 1. So now we're just going to look at x to the third and the x squared. What comes out of x to the third and x squared?
X to the third.
Okay, and it's going to be your lowest exponent. So what's your lowest exponent there?
So would the number be 1?
Okay, the number is 1. You're right. So you are taking a 1 out, but you don't have to write that down. Because there's not a number bigger than 1 that will come out of both of them, now you're only focusing on the x to the third and the x squared. So what I'm going to take out of both of those is x squared. Okay? And when I do that, I have x squared times x. That's what gives me x to the third. Then I'm going to have x squared times 9, and that gives me 9x squared. Okay, so what I've dealt with here is I've dealt with my first 2 terms. Now I want to go back, and I want to look at these 2 terms. Now there is nothing in common with the x and the 9. So there's nothing that I can take out of those 2 terms. So what I have left is positive 1. So positive 1 times x gives me x, and positive 1 times 9 gives me 9. Okay? So now, do you see how I've got this x plus 9 and this x plus 9, how it shows up twice?
Yes.
Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to write that down once. Okay? Now, I have x squared and I have plus 1. So that is my other term. Okay? And that is factoring by grouping. Okay, and we're going to do some more of these. I just kind of wanted to do an overview real quick. Okay? Now this is factoring x squared plus bx plus c. And the thing that you want to notice about this one is that you have a 1 right there. There's no value or no coefficient in front of x squared except for 1. And so these rules, what we're talking about here, these rules apply when 1 is in front of the x. Or in front of the x squared is what I should have said. Okay? So this applies when a 1 is in front of the x squared. So what you have to do is you've got to identify your sum and you've got to identify your product. Okay? Sum means addition. Product means multiplication. Okay? So, this number right here, this negative 44, that is going to be our product. Okay, so our C value is going to be our product, and that's that negative 44. It's going to be the number that doesn't have a variable with it at all. It doesn't have an x squared, it doesn't have an x, it doesn't have anything. Okay, so that's going to be my product, negative 44. Okay, then my sum is always going to be this number in front of the x, okay? It's not the number in front of the x squared, it's the number that's in front of just the x. And that's our b value in standard form. So I'm going to put b value, okay? And for this one, that is 7. So what I'm looking for, I'm asking myself, what two numbers multiply together to get negative 44 and add together to get 7, okay? So what I do is I think about what multiplied together gives me 44, or negative 44. So negative 44 times 1. Then we've got maybe negative 22 times 2. Then I've got maybe negative 11 times 4. So all of those multiplied together give me negative 44. Now, when I look at negative 11 and positive 4, I'm like, okay, well, if I subtract those, I'm going to get 7. But negative 11 plus positive 4 gives me negative 7. And what I want to get is positive 7. So if I switch these signs around and I say negative 4 times positive 11, that's going to give me a b value of 7. And if you remembered, when we talked in class, Do you remember this picture? I'm not sure I can pull it up, but I'm going to try. Okay. So let me pull this up. That's not what I wanted to do either. Hold on, one more time. Okay. Okay, so do you remember this picture on the board? It was, is my product positive? If my product is positive, then my two numbers have to both be positive or have to both be negative. Now, in the problem that we just did, we had a negative product. So when I have a negative product, I have to deal with these rules. Okay? Is my product negative? One number must be negative and one number must be positive. Okay, so that's what we're dealing with on the problem right now. We're dealing with one of the numbers must be negative and one of the numbers must be positive. So if we go back here to the problem we were working on, okay, because I have a negative product right here, one of my numbers is going to have to be positive and one of my numbers is going to have to be negative. So because of that, the two numbers that I'm using are x minus 4 and x plus 11. And that's my answer right here. Here's my final answer. Because negative 4 times 11 gives me my negative 44. Negative 4 plus 11 gives me my positive 7. Okay? So this right here is the factored form of x squared plus 7x minus 44. Okay? And I know that's overwhelming. Let's try another one, okay? Let's do this one. So for this one, I've got x squared minus x minus 56. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to identify my sum and I want to identify my product. Okay? So I'm looking for my b value, and that's the number that's in front of just my x. That's going to be my sum. So what number is in front of just my x? What's in front of just my x for this one over here? This is what we're going to work on.
Like the one that's the B value?
Yes.
That would be X, or would it just be 1?
It would be. It would just be 1. You're right. What else is in front of that x? What kind of 1? Because you got it. That's exactly right. So my 1 is right there, and it is negative. So my sum is going to be negative. What's my product?
56.
Good. And what do I have in front of that 56?
A negative.
Good. You got it. That's exactly right. Just don't forget your positives and your negatives. Now, 56 is one of those multiplication tables that we forget and we don't have memorized. But I want you to look at this right here. If I do 5, 6, oh, I'm down at the bottom, too far. Okay, let me see if I can make it just a little bit bigger. Okay, if I do 5, 6, 7, 8, okay, 56 is 7 times 8. So 7 times 8 equals 56. That's just a little trick to remember what that is, okay? So 7 times 8 gives me 56. If I make 7 or 8 negative, is that going to equal negative 1? Could I make one of those numbers negative to where 7 plus 8 is going to equal negative 1? Which one would I have to make negative?
88.
Good. That's exactly right. So because that number has the higher absolute value, that's the one that I need to be negative so that we get -1. So there's your numbers right there, 7 and -8. So what we're going to do, so our answer to this is x plus 7 and x minus 8. You ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. This is where students sometimes get confused, and it just takes practice. Practice, practice, practice. Okay. We are going to identify our sum and our product the same or similar. We're going to do it in a similar way. So we still have to identify a sum and a product. My sum is still that middle term. It's the coefficient in front of the x. So it's my b value. So what number is my b value, or what number is the coefficient with my x?
13.
You got it. 13. So my sum is 13. Actually, I'm going to write this off to the side. My sum is 13. Okay, now my product, I no longer have just a 1 in front of my x squared. So in order to get my product, what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply my a value times my c value. My a value times my c value. So it's always going to be a times c. That's how I get my product. Now here, on the screen before, my product was only my c value because my a value is 1. So 1 times anything, or 1 times c, is always going to be that c value. But now I've got a number in front of the x squared. So I multiply my a value that's in front of the x squared times my c, and that gives me my product. Now in this situation, it is 7 times -2. So that gives me -14. So I am still looking for two numbers multiplied together, give me -14, and added together, give me +13. Okay? So multiplied to get 14, I can do 2 times 7, and I can do 1 times 14. Now, because my product is negative, that means one of my numbers has to be positive and one of my numbers has to be negative. Okay, that's what that means. So, if I've got 2 and 7 and I've got 1 and 14, when I subtract those, are either one of those going to give me 13? You're right, 14 minus 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my negative sign with my 1 then. Okay? Now, the wrong way to do this, so this is not the way to do it. I'm going to put wrong. Okay? What students want to do once they've identified that their numbers are -1 and 14, they want to do it the way that we did it before and just do x minus 1 and x plus 14. But that is not correct. Because if I multiplied x minus 1 times x plus 14, I'm not going to get my original problem, which is 7x squared plus 13x minus 2. So when we are doing it this way, what we have to do with our numbers is we split This positive 13x, we split our b term. So I'm going to write split b term. Okay? So I keep my a term as 7x squared. My 13x becomes minus 1x plus 14x. Okay? So all I've done is instead of writing 13x, I've written negative 1x plus 14x. That's it. Negative 1x plus 14x is still 13x. I've just written it out. So I have taken 3 terms and I've turned it into 4 terms. That's what I do with these numbers. That's what I do with these numbers, and that's different than what I did before when my a value was 1. So after I've split my b term, I am going to factor by grouping. Okay? So when I factor by grouping, I look at my first 2 terms, and x will come out of both of those terms. So I have an x on the outside, and then I have 7x minus 1. Then I ask myself, what comes out of these 2 terms right here? What comes out of both of those? Correct. Are they both even?
Yeah.
Good. So since they're both even, what number comes out? What's your lowest even number? So if I'm counting by even numbers, what do I start with? 2. Good. So 2 is what comes out. And I'm left with 7x minus 1. So x plus 2 and 7x minus 1 are my 2 terms right there. And this is where students typically need the most practice, is factoring ax squared plus bx plus c. Is it okay if I go to the next screen?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So now we have another one. So my first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to identify my sum, and I'm going to identify my product. So let's start with the sum. The sum is your C value. I'm sorry, sum is not my C value. Sum is my B value. And my B value is that number that's associated with the X. So what is my sum for this one? You got it. And I like how you kept the negative. Good job. Now my product for this one is A times C. So I have to multiply. Tell me the 2 numbers that I have to multiply together. What are the 2 numbers I have to multiply together?
6 and 12.
6 and 12. Okay, and then we'll do that off to the side because I know sometimes that's so 6 and 12. That's what I had to do to get that. Okay, so 6, and I'm going to do it just right down here. 12 times 6, if we don't have that memorized, and it's fine not to. 6 times 12. Let's write it a little higher. Okay. 6 times 2 is 12. 6 times 1 is 6, plus 1 is 72. So my product here is going to be 72. Okay. So I am looking for 2 numbers multiplied together give me 72, and added together give me negative 17. Now, if I look at this page right here, it says, is my product positive? Okay. If my product is positive, I can have a positive times a positive number, and my sum will be positive. Or I can have a negative number times a negative number, and my sum will be negative. My product has to be positive. So here I've got a positive product and a negative sum. So the only way I can get a positive product if I have a negative number times another negative number. Okay? So any ideas what multiplied together gives you positive 72? What two numbers?
Let's see, for a positive 72,
Right.
12 times 6.
12 times 6 does. That's correct. Okay, but 12 plus 6 is not going to give us our negative 17. Okay, what about 8 times 9? Okay, 8 times 9, does that give us 72? It does. It does. You're fine. And then negative 8 plus negative 9 gives us negative 17. Okay? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this negative 17 and I'm going to split it. So I'm going to have 6x squared minus 8x minus 9x plus 12. And we factor by grouping. Okay, so I'm looking at 6x squared and negative 8x. So look at the 6 and the negative 8. What number goes into both 6 and negative 8?
2.
2, good. And do I have an x in both of those?
Yes.
I do, good. Okay, so 2 times what gives me 6? 2 times what gives me 6?
3.
Good. Okay, and then I need my x. 2 times what gives me negative 8?
4.
And it's going to be negative because I've got to get negative 8. So positive 2 times negative 4 is going to give me negative 8. And then it's actually positive 2x times negative 4, which gives me negative 8x. Now this next one is a little bit tricky because I have to end up getting a positive 3 and a negative 4. So when I'm done, my binomial that I get when I factor something out has got to be 3x minus 4. So I have to think about what number can I take out of negative 9 and positive 12. Now, what's the number that goes into 9 and 12?
3.
3 does. You're absolutely right. But I've got to take out a negative 3. Do you see how that 9 right there is negative to begin with? So I've got to be able to multiply negative 3 times something that's going to give me negative 9x. And it's got to be exactly the same thing as 3x minus 4. So that's why I have to factor out that negative 3. Because negative 3 times 3x gives me negative 9. Negative 3 times negative 4 gives me positive 12. And because of that, I have positive 3x minus 4 on both of my binomials right here, and that's what I have to be able to factor by grouping. So that's taking this negative 3 out is a little bit tricky sometimes for students. So kind of highlight that or kind of put a little star there. So I have 2x minus 3 and 3x minus 4. Okay, now these are difference of perfect squares. Difference of perfect squares. And we talked about perfect squares being the number. So if I've got 1 squared, that equals 1. 2 squared equals 4. 3 squared equals 9. 4 squared equals 16. 5 squared equals 25. And I could keep going. These are perfect squares. It's what you can take the square root of and it comes out evenly. And we want to remember that x times x is x squared. So x squared is a perfect square, as well as x to the 4th. Because x squared times x squared is equal to x to the 4th. So this is a perfect square, as is this is a perfect square. So we want to kind of have an idea of what perfect squares are. Now, the other thing that we have to remember is it has to be subtraction. So this number right here has to be a perfect square. That number right there has to be a perfect square. And this right here has to be subtraction. If that's not the case, then it's not a difference of perfect square. So if I had x squared plus 36, it wouldn't work. That's not a perfect square because I've got a plus. In order for this to work, you've got to have a perfect square subtracted another perfect square. So if you've got plus, you can't do it. So here, I have x squared, which is perfect. So I take the square root of x, which is x, and I write it down at the beginning. Then I'm going to take the square root of 36. And the square root of 36 is 6. Okay. Now, to factor this, I have 1 positive, so I have x plus 6, and then I have 1 negative, x minus 6. Okay. Now, if I were to FOIL this, now this is your final answer. We're done right here. But the reason that we're done is if I were to FOIL this, and we did this last week, if I had x squared, that's x times x, then I had my outer, which is x times negative 6. My inner is 6 times x. And then my last is 6 times negative 6. Those middle two terms cancel, and I'm left with x squared minus 36. Okay? That's why this works, and that's why it's got to be minus. Okay? Now, here on this side where I've got 4x squared minus 25, I have a perfect square, which is 4x squared, subtracted another perfect square, which is 25. So what is the square root of 4? What times itself gives me 4? 2. Good. So I'm going to put a 2 here, and I'm going to put a 2 here. What times itself gives us x squared? You got it. Good. Okay. Then I've got 25. What's the square root of 25? 5. You got it. Then I do 1 plus and 1 minus. And that is my answer right here. Okay. Now, I want you to just try these real quick, or whichever ones you want to try, and then I'll help you. And if you're watching at home, what I would do is I would pause on your computer right now while you work these out. So pause right now, and then work all of these out. And then on the next slide, you're going to be able to see the answers. So go ahead and pause your recording. I have to get rid of a picture because I made a mistake. So I need to get rid of this picture. Hey, I did it. Okay, so here are the answers to the problem on the screen before so that you can check yourself. And then here is just some hints for you. Hints on finding your two numbers. So if your product is positive, so when you've got a positive product, you are going to have two positive numbers or two negative numbers. That's the only way that you can get a product that's positive. If you have a product that's negative, the only way that you can get a product that's negative is if you have one number that's negative and one number that's positive. That's the only way that you can do that. Okay? So both of these screens are good screens to have. Now, I would go ahead and rewind and work on those practice problems. And then here are your practice problems. So pause on this screen. Okay? And here are your solutions. So this is how you check yourself on your solutions for those. Okay? Okay, and if you have questions on any of these, email me or ask me questions during class. Or not during class, probably during office hours if you have questions on these. Okay?